I've been spending a lot of time with the Switch 2 since it launched, and yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. It's bigger, it's faster, and the new screen is easily my favorite upgrade so far. Honestly, I'm glad I picked one up. But there are a few changes that definitely caught me off guard, and they might make you think twice about picking one up, at least right now. So let's get into it, the good, the not so good, and everything in between with the latest Nintendo console. First off, this thing is way bigger than I expected. Like side by side with my OLED Switch, it's not even close. It's also a bit heavier, not in a bad way, but just enough to feel more solid in the hands. The shape still feels familiar, this is clearly still a Switch, but there are just enough small changes to make it feel like something new. The thinner bezels, a slightly wider frame, better grip, it just feels nicer. And yeah, a lot of the layout is still the same from before, but there are still a few new details you might not spot right away. There's a new C button for game chat, the Joy-Cons got a redesign, and probably the most underrated change, the upgraded kickstand. This time around, the stand is stronger, wider, and way more adjustable than the Switch 1, up to 150 degrees. I like to keep mine tilted all the way back since it makes it easier to grab off my desk and snap back into place. We'll see how the Switch 2 holds up long term, but so far, after a lot of use at home and on the road, mine still looks brand new. Which is also a pretty good thing because I really do like this all black design. You've still got some pops of color around the sticks, but the overall look and feel of it is cleaner and more modern. And I've noticed that it doesn't really show fingerprints, which is always a plus. This is easily the most grown-up looking console Nintendo's ever made. Not saying it beats the GameCube though, let's not get carried away. But Nintendo also added some nice quality of life upgrades. 2 USB-C ports, one up top, one on the bottom, a built-in mic, and a more durable game card slot right next to the headphone jack. The dock also got a slight refresh. It's a little bigger, a little heavier, and feels sturdier overall. Setup out of the box was also really simple. Turn it on, install a software update, sign in with your Nintendo account, and if you're coming over from another Switch, you can directly transfer over your saved data. I did that and had zero issues. Overall, when it comes to the design, this really does feel like a natural step up from the OLED Switch and 2 steps above the original Switch. One of the other biggest highlights, at least for me, is the new larger screen. Now I'm used to OLED. It's on my iPhone, my monitor, the Switch I've been using for the last few years. So when I heard the Switch 2 was going with an LCD, I'll be honest, I expected it to feel like a huge downgrade. But this actually surprised me. The colors are bright, the image is sharp, and the size difference compared to the original and OLED models is way more noticeable than I thought it would be. This is a 7.9-inch screen, up from 6.2 on the OG Switch and 7 on the OLED. On paper, that doesn't sound huge, but in person, it's one of the first things that makes this feel like a real upgrade. I still use my PS Vita pretty often, especially on flights like my recent trips to New York and Chicago, so I'm used to smaller handheld screens. And honestly, I never had an issue with the size of the OLED Switch. But this size, it just feels better. Now, I've seen some mixed reactions online, mostly around how big of a downgrade this is from OLED. And yeah, OLED is OLED, this is definitely not on the same level. But at least for me, I haven't noticed anything that's taken away from the experience. And I've been genuinely impressed by how good this 1080p LCD looks. But one letdown is that there isn't many games that support 120 frames per second so far, at least not yet. And depending on how sensitive you are to motion blur, the screen might look a little soft or blurry at times, but this hasn't really bothered me. I also haven't had any overheating issues so far, whether I'm using it in handheld mode or docked. The back of the screen can feel a little warm after a long session, especially when pulling it out from the dock, but nothing that's raised any red flags for me so far. On that note, I definitely recommend grabbing a screen protector. I've been using this matte one from a brand called Amfilm I found on Amazon. This was pretty easy to install and it cuts down on glare a lot. I've had mine on since day one, and even in direct sunlight, which I don't do very often, the screen holds up surprisingly well. I'll drop a link below for this one, but you can definitely find a lot of good options out there. The Switch 2 also has some other small but solid upgrades, like better speakers that are louder and clearer. And there's also support for Wi-Fi 6. So if you have a compatible router, you should see faster downloads and more stable online performance compared to Switch 1. And if you're someone who likes sharing gameplay or creating content, you can still record clips directly on the console, but now they're in 1080p at 30 frames per second. So just like before, hold the capture button to save a video and tap it once to take a screenshot. But if you don't think you'll use this, you can do what I did. By going to the accessibility menu inside system settings, you can find an option to remap it and nearly every other button. I'm still kinda experimenting with this, but I currently have mine set as a second way to head back to the home screen. Bottom line, for a non-OLED screen, this thing is kind of a beast. I haven't missed OLED nearly as much as I thought I would, and playing older games like Need for Speed or Metroid at this size just feels better. For me, the main appeal of the Switch has always been portability, and that hasn't changed with the Switch 2. I mostly play in handheld, but you do get a boost in performance when you play it docked. Depending on the game, the Switch 2 can output up to 4K 60 on a compatible TV or monitor. And this definitely isn't trying to compete with PS5 or Xbox Series X, but I'd say it holds up pretty well. First-party games have looked great on here, and third-party games are surprisingly solid too. But if you want the best performance from your Switch 2, docked mode is still the way to go. That said, there are a few trade-offs, like when it comes to variable refresh rate. This is great for overall image performance, but as of now it only works in handheld mode for some reason. Nintendo initially said this would work both in docked and undocked mode, so this is kind of a big miss. HDR has also been a common issue I've seen online, so if your image has been looking kind of dull and washed out, I'll drop a link down in the description to a really good video that can help. Oh, and another thing that Nintendo is trying out with the Switch 2 are game keycards. So instead of a regular cartridge with a game on it, these cards just act as a license that lets you download the game from the eShop. So yeah, it's basically a digital game with a physical key. Nintendo says the upside to doing it this way is that you can still lend it out, sell it, or trade it in, just like a normal physical copy. So far, most of the games using this format are third-party titles like Star Wars Outlaws, but you can easily tell if a game uses one by looking for this symbol on the case. Now, there's for sure a bigger conversation here about how physical media is changing and not always for the better. And depending on who you ask, these game key cards can feel like a step in that direction. Alright, so what can you play on the Switch 2? Well, there's actually a pretty good range. There's new titles built specifically for this system, like Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, enhanced versions of older games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and a growing retro library through Nintendo Switch Online, which now includes GameCube. Mario Kart World is probably the game I spent the most time with so far. It's still very much Mario Kart, but the open world tracks add a nice layer of exploration that makes it feel like a natural evolution in the series. Almost like Mario Kart meets Forza Horizon. The visuals hold up really well, and online performance has been pretty smooth in every race I've tested. And Donkey Kong Bonanza is exactly the kind of game I wanted from Switch 2. Honestly, it already feels like a certified classic. It's definitely the main game I've been playing lately. It gives me that same feeling I had playing Mario Galaxy and especially Mario Odyssey for the first time. I wouldn't tell anyone to buy Switch 2 just for these two games, but so far they made it worth it for me. And I think that just speaks to how strong Nintendo's first-party games usually are. That said, if you missed out on games from the Switch 1 era, this is a great chance to catch up, especially thanks to backward compatibility. Most games for Switch 1 should work on Switch 2, and I've been slowly making my way through Witcher 3 finally. I'm super late with that, but it really does look great on this new screen. From what I've seen, most Switch 1 games run better on Switch 2, with faster load times and better performance. And like I mentioned earlier, if you're a Switch Online member, you've now got access to GameCube games. Naturally, I had to hop back into Soul Calibur, and yeah, it still holds up. That said, there's still no way to black out the screen borders when playing older titles. Nintendo gives you this pattern frame instead, which isn't a huge deal, but does feel a little cluttered and distracting. It would be really cool if we're able to customize this later on. When it comes to games, here are a few quick things to be aware of. Some older Switch games now have Switch 2 versions, and if you already own the game, you can upgrade to it, but it might cost you. Like if you want to upgrade to Tears of the Kingdom, it'll run you $10 on top of what you already paid. Though you can also get the upgrade for no extra cost by signing up for a Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack subscription. Also, game prices have been trending a lot higher lately, and some have already passed the $80 mark. What makes this worse in a lot of ways is that Nintendo rarely ever puts its games on sale. The Switch 2 does come with a decent amount of onboard storage, 256 gigabytes, but in real life this is more like 230. So if you want more storage, you specifically need to get a microSD express card. They're faster but also more expensive, and SD cards that were compatible with the OG Switch do not work with Switch 2. So just to give you an idea, I picked up an express card for about $70 with 256 gigs, which gave me about 480 gigabytes of total space on the Switch 2. So depending on how many digital games you plan to install, this is definitely something to factor into your setup. One of the other upsides to having a larger Switch is that the Joy-Cons actually feel more comfortable at this size. The buttons are slightly larger, the thumbsticks feel more fluid to move around, and the new magnetic locking system is a big improvement over the old version. These can sound like small changes, but if you compare them side by side with the originals, you'll feel the difference right away. I did add some covers to my thumbsticks for extra grip, and I do like how they look. Speaking of thumbsticks, Nintendo says they've upgraded the internals to help reduce stick drift from happening. I haven't had any issues yet, but if that changes, I'll pin a comment below. The upgraded HD rumble feature also feels stronger and more precise now, though I did end up turning this off and we'll get to why in a bit. Aside from these changes to the Joy-Cons, there's also the addition of mouse mode, which lets you slide the Joy-Cons around like a mouse in games that support it. I made the mistake of first trying this out in Fortnite, and you'll probably have an easier time than me if you already use a mouse to play games on PC. I got absolutely embarrassed in this. Personally, I probably won't mess with it much unless the game really calls for it, like Drag and Drive. This game hasn't received a lot of attention, but I actually like it, probably because I really like basketball. It will make your arms tired, but for a quick game here and there, it works. I think mouse mode is a great example of that classic Nintendo way of thinking outside the box, but I guess we'll see if they keep giving us reasons to actually use it. Another small change with the Joy-Cons is the addition of the new C button, which opens up game chat. So this lets you use voice chat or even video chat if you have the new USB-C camera or a compatible one plugged in. It's free right now, but Nintendo says this will be locked behind a paywall starting in March 2026. So I'm curious to see how many people actually end up using this or just stick with Discord like they already do. Now, I wasn't really expecting this, but the new Switch Pro controller actually surprised me, mostly because of how comfortable and quiet it is. The new controller also has a headphone jack and programmable back paddles. And honestly, I like their placement better than the back buttons on the Xbox Elite Series 2 and DualSense Edge. This controller is not cheap by any means, but if you're using the Switch 2 like a living room console, it's totally worth it. You can still use the original Pro controller too, just keep in mind it won't wake the Switch 2 from sleep. But maybe one of the coolest low-key features has been Game Share. This lets one Switch 2 stream a compatible game to another Switch 2, or even a Switch 1. It's basically a modern take on DS download play, but with better graphics and smoother gameplay. Just keep in mind that only a Switch 2 can host a Game Share session, and not every shared game will work with a Switch 1. So here I have a Switch 2 and a Switch OLED connected through Game Share playing Mario Odyssey, with each controlling something different. Pretty cool, right? And if you want to share a game with someone who's not close by, you can also use this through Game Chat, but this will only work between two Switch 2 consoles. The downside is that Game Share only works with a limited number of games right now, but you are able to check which games are compatible by going through the Game Share menu. If Nintendo keeps expanding support, Game Share could be a killer feature, especially for anyone who has multiple consoles or who still has a Switch 1 lying around. Okay, as much as I've been enjoying the Switch 2, there are a few things that have been a bit of a letdown, and one stands out more than the rest: battery life. Maybe it's me, let me know if this has happened to you, but mine has been draining faster than my OLED ever did. Nintendo says the Switch 2 should last between 4.5 and 7 hours depending on the game, but I've definitely been hitting the low end of that. I've seen the battery drop 30 to 40% in just an hour depending on what I'm playing. And yeah, that might just be the trade-off for having a bigger, brighter screen. If you're trying to save battery life, you'll want to change a few settings. Like I mentioned earlier, I turned off the HD rumble feature, but I also turned off auto brightness and try to keep brightness on the low end, depending on the situation. I think it's made an improvement so far. But I'm definitely not the only person who has noticed the battery problems. It's actually received enough attention that Nintendo's issued a fix for it that involves going into the Switch 2's recovery mode. I'll drop a link in the description to the instructions, but after doing it myself, I didn't really see a difference. The good thing is that the Switch 2 does seem to charge quickly when plugged in. I keep this portable Anker battery in my backpack to charge up my phone or laptop when I'm out, but it's come in clutch for my Switch more than a few times already, so I highly recommend. Even with that issue, there's one option I think everyone should turn on, and that's stop charging at 90% in the system settings menu. It might sound counterintuitive, but this helps preserve battery health over time by preventing extra wear and tear on the Switch 2's lithium-ion battery. Okay, let's talk pricing for a second. If you live in the US, you probably notice how much prices have crept up on pretty much everything. If you're buying a Switch 2, a game, and a couple accessories, you're easily already in the $600 to $700 range. What's different now is that if you're waiting on prices to go down in a few years, that isn't as guaranteed as it used to be. In fact, we've seen the opposite with other consoles lately, with prices going up instead of down. And one last thing, low-key, I hoped we would finally get some kind of achievement or trophy system with the Switch 2. I know it's not a must-have for everyone, but after playing so many games on Xbox and PlayStation over the years, it's cool that I can still pull up my account and see the exact date I first played something like Halo 3 or GTA 5. I think a lot of people would have appreciated a Nintendo version of that, but then again, Nintendo's always done things a little differently, and the Switch 2 is no exception. Now the Switch 2 isn't my main console. I mostly bounce between Xbox and PS5 for third-party stuff and exclusives. By the way, I'll be posting an updated PS5 versus Xbox video soon, so keep an eye out for that. But after putting in real time with the Switch 2, here's where I've landed. It's more powerful, better built, and more social, and it doesn't lose what made the original Switch fun in the first place. This is the more refined, more polished version of the Switch 1. Obviously, it's still the best and really one of the only ways to play new Nintendo exclusives. And like the original, I'll mostly use it as a companion console alongside my Xbox or PS5. If you're someone who spent a lot of time with the first Switch, you'll definitely notice the upgrades, just don't expect them to be groundbreaking. So before you pick one of these up, I think it's worth asking, how will you actually use the Switch 2 and what games do you see yourself playing after a few months? Because like any new console, it's going to take time to build a deep library that really separates it from the original. And yeah, there are some people who say this feels more like a Switch Pro or a Switch 1.5, and I get where they're coming from. But for me, this feels like a proper Switch 2. Maybe one that would have hit a little harder had it released a few years ago, but it's here now and I'm looking forward to what Nintendo does with it next.